Well, yesterday on a sister program, Politics Today, my colleague Shionwo Kimbaloe had both Mr. Monday Ubani, SAN, and Senator Peter Nwebonye on their own thoughts on what transpired yesterday at the Senate. This morning, we're being joined by Dr. Ezekwesili, who is a former Minister of Education, a former VP, Vice President at the World Bank for Africa, and also the former Chancellor. I believe that she stepped down from that position now. I want to say the founder of the School of Fixed Politics, who was there yesterday at the Senate Ethics and Privileges hearing. We also have in the studio here with us Dr. Abiola Akiyode, who's the Executive Director, Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center, and also the convener of Womanifesto. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Malfe.
Well, Dr. Ezekwesili, I'm going to start with you because you were at the heart of what transpired yesterday. You went there as a witness to the petition that was laid before the Senate Committee on Ethics and Privileges. What were your expectations at that committee hearing?
Thank you so much. So the expectation was and continues to be that the Senate and the senators would understand the criticality of fair hearing as the cornerstone of any democratic system, and that whenever that is not recognized, that it imperils the entire democracy and justice system of a country. And so going as a witness along with the petition, Dr. Akiyode-Afolabi and myself wanted to ensure that that petitioner would get all he needed to get from the committee, because he said that he had objections to presenting the petition immediately before them. He wanted that they would address those two objections. Number one objection, he said that at various times, members of the Senate, and especially the Senate Committee on Ethics and Privileges, had made public statements that already discredited his senator, for whom he signed a petition of sexual harassment against the Senate president, and that therefore they already have a perception of the matter. They already have a position on the matter. And so coming before them would not give the justice that they expect through fair hearing. So he asked that a newly constituted committee that would inspire confidence would be necessary. And that number two, he needed the principal witness in the petition to be with him, because he felt that he was not served by her being on suspension illegally, unconstitutionally, as we know that the rules of the Senate are not superior to our laws, to judicial precedents, and to our Constitution. Therefore, he asked that his senator be allowed to accompany him in the discussion of the petition, which the two of us were clearly interested in getting the chair of the committee as well as the members of the committee to acknowledge and to grant. But all we faced yesterday, Dr. Abiola, Akiyode-Afolabi, and I, all we faced yesterday was a repeat of a pattern of using Senate rules to make sure that our voices were stifled, that we couldn't express. They either said we should shut the microphone, or they said you cannot speak, or they said the rules will not allow you to express it. It was unbelievable. It was just a repeat pattern of a culture of saying, even when you have your right, we do not recognize it because we are the powerful people. And that should not be acceptable in this society.
Well, I do not know if you watched the account given by Mr. Monday Obani and also Senator Peter Wemboye yesterday on a sister program, Politics Today. Mr. Monday Obani said it was a matter of administration of oath. Was that why? I mean, you have given the background now as to why the petitioner felt uncomfortable with giving his own side or adopting what it was that he had been submitted in an affidavit. Was that the reason why he refused to have an oath administered on him?
That was the reason why he initially refused. But when his counsel, and she's right there in the studio with you, when his counsel saw the way that things were orchestrated, she then said, and allow yourself to be administered into oath, which he did. And when we saw the way that he was being, more or less harassed in the engagement, we then decided that we also, who had initially said we were not going to be on oath until the petitioner was comfortable to render his petition to the committee, then said we were also ready. I definitely said I was ready to be on oath. They ignored it. They ignored it and ignored it. And then this senator, who had a torrent of insults, was basically saying, interjecting, and then they took the floor. Meanwhile, in what capacity? The people are misrepresenting a bit. He was not there in the capacity of a senator who is a member of that committee. No, he said he came as a witness for the Senate president. And therefore, he was in equivalent status as myself and Dr. Afolabi. Yet, they ignored us in that declaration for oath to be administered, and allowed him, without oath administered on him as a witness, to start saying, oh, they are not serious. Since they are not serious with what they want to do, I am ready. Administer the oath on him. They didn't administer the oath on him even then, but he went ahead to talk. Now, when he said that, it was a repeat of what the committee members had in fact started off the meeting with after they heard the petitioner say he had those objections. Oh, listen, we're not on serious about, we don't do, maybe Dr. Abiola will remember it well. Something about, basically casting us as unserious. And, for the life of me, what is unserious about a demand for fair hearing? This is exactly the same pattern. I don't think Nigerians are realizing that what we have here is a monopoly, a mass of power that will not be questioned by the citizens. This is what's going on. Our senators are essentially saying we are above the law just because we have the appellation senator to our name. And that should not be acceptable. So when the senator repeated that remark of unseriousness, I turned to him and I said, can you please shut up? And he was already actually trading words, in the sense that he was calling, saying to the petitioner, if you don't want to speak, just let it be. There are renditions of this. So he was already energized. to engage in what you saw yesterday. There was nothing about in fact, my saying that to him was in response to his behavior, not the other way around. I mean, you don't just simply say to a person, please shut up. Something must have led to it. It was his indecorous way of shutting down the petitioner that made me, as a witness that accompanied the petitioner, to say to him, please shut up. Let him talk. You know? So that's it.
Well, fair hearing was what you were looking for at the Senate, and clearly that has been imperiled. Dr. Akiyode, we heard your intervention as well. You know, at the beginning, according to the report that my colleague documented, my colleague Gloria Umezioke documented there, when it would seem that you were not very comfortable. Was it the chairmanship of the committee, or was it the committee as a whole that you were uncomfortable with?
Well, first is the issue of integrity of the committee as a whole, and also to let us know that in a situation like this, one would have expected that they would have a special committee, because the allegation of sexual harassment, almost every one of them in the National Assembly had one thing to say or the other. So which shows that there is an integrity question already. But what we had asked them was,
by one thing to say, you mean in previous interviews?
Interviews, comments, you know, and all of that. So but what we said yesterday was in particular about the chairman of the committee, who on the 5th of March had addressed a media briefing, and he had spoken at several other occasions where he had said the petition was dead on arrival, you know, and had lacked merit, you know, and things like that. And we felt for someone like him, who already had that impression of that petition. Now, the petition that the petitioner brought yesterday, if you recall, Senator Natasha had brought that same petition and was rejected by the House on the basis of the National Assembly rules. So the petitioner yesterday was speaking as a third party. So he brought the petition on behalf of the constituency and also on behalf of Senator Natasha, stating almost the same facts. If there's anything different there, there are probably things that Senator Natasha said in the first person. Now, so meaning that they are privy already, they were privy already to the petition being brought by the petitioner. So sitting on that table, you know, gave the chairman that ability to have read the previous one and also this one. So he was not sitting well on that table, and that was the point we were raising. The question of fair hearing is about when you are called upon to make a judgment on an issue, it must be done with no form of bias. So from where I was coming from, he already had made statements, he was already being biased. And what we only asked him to do yesterday was to step down and allowed somebody else to take that proceeding. And those were the conditions that we set for him. The second condition was, in the affidavit put before them by the petitioner, one of the paragraphs had talked about Senator Natasha coming to bring documentary and other sources of evidence that she has. So we then asked them, because it would make no sense for him to appear before them, make all the declaration according to the affidavit without having a principal witness, his principal witness, to come to the panel to speak. So we directed them to that paragraph of his petition, and that they should give a ruling, because if she is not coming, he is not the one who was sexually harassed. It would be right for the person who made the allegation to be there. So we wanted them to make that ruling, and that was where the problem started. Now, the attitude of the panel was not what you would expect from any responsible chamber in the world. We got there, things like, you didn't set a ground rule. When you come into a panel and you have some ground rules, or you have some rules in your National Assembly rule, you should tell us. At the point we were telling them, we were raising up a hand, which is the normal thing that everybody will do when you have something to say. They will say, no, you cannot raise up your hand. You cannot talk off the mic. There were a lot of things there. So we had to ask them at the point and said, can you please explain to us, if we want to speak, what do you think we should do? They were not friendly. And it was like they already had a plan. And so what they wanted us to do was just to walk into that plan. And we went there, with free mind, and we just realized that they were not going to cooperate with us. So right from the beginning of the conversation, we had issues with them. We raised objection, you said no. The guy cannot, the petitioner cannot raise that objection without taking the oath. And we said, but we wanted to make some preliminary statements so that we know whether to even take the oath or not. And they said, no, we can't even say anything without taking the oath. So at the point we had to say, okay, petitioner, go ahead so that we can have a right to speak. Dr. Obi wanted to make it, she also came in as a witness. So we had our witnesses lined up, to the matter. So she asked, can she take the oath now? They said no. So it was more or less like they had a plan not to even allow us to speak. At the point, they were insinuating a lot of things. We're a serious panel. We don't want unserious people here. Quite disrespectful. And speaking to us as if they were speaking to some slaves that they brought. So for me, one of these things that this is showing, that because at that very high level, of people who are making decisions in this country, to have people there who are so patriarchal, who don't mind the kind of language when you're speaking to people in public, who don't give respect to citizens, was not something you would expect, It
was not a part of your expectations yesterday.
It wasn't.
Well, I do know that Ayo has questions for you, but, listening to Senator Nweboyi yesterday, my colleague Sheung also managed to ask him, if he felt regrets about, how events transpired yesterday. And he categorically said, no, he didn't feel any regrets. But I do know that, looking at the entire scenario, a lot of Nigerians watched that video in shock, wondering how could things have descended to this level. For you, do you think that there's anything that could have been done differently to prevent that?
I have very much reflected on it, and I come to the conclusion that from our own side of the table, we needed to be very firm on the fact that we were not going to accept the subordination of the laws of the land and the Constitution on the freedom to express ourselves, especially within a public institution like the Senate, which is the highest lawmaking organ of the country. We were not going to, allow anyone to stifle us. That was what the Senate committee members did in a chorused manner, an orchestrated manner, all through the period that we were there. And at the time, the gentleman basically doubled the energy of that disrespect and was basically not in any way respecting the petitioner and carried on. You could see, I didn't just simply look at a person and say, please shut up. No, that's not what happened. The sequence of events show clearly that it was in response to what they were doing, which is reminiscent of exactly where we came from on this matter. A person has a voice to express, but through abuse of power, senators collectively decided that they are not listening and they are not willing to grant that access that the Constitution gives. So for me, there is nothing that we could have done other than to say, we must be heard. And once I was saying, please swear me to an oath, and they were ignoring and putting off my microphone. They had this young man that had the duty to just keep, he kept doing that. You saw how very composed we were. We did not allow ourselves. I mean, we could have We could have been bold as that fellow. We could have. But we didn't do that. We didn't descend to that. It was, you could see the response that came from my own end. So there is nothing that we can look at and say, oh, in the context of what we were facing, we should have done differently. And I am very good at being able to say, okay, this is something that didn't work. I like reviews. Maupe, you know that in this society, there is a historical attitude toward voice. It's not just the voice of women, it's the voice of those who say that they do not agree with a situation, or who, like me, are persistent in demanding public accountability from those that lead, from institutions that belong to society. It is a historical, more or less, culture. And so that attitude pervades the way that our lawmakers are behaving. I was actually very pleased with what happened yesterday, because now it's in the public domain what women endure in many instances, and the rest of society may know a little about it, but has not focused on it. I think that it has now come to the top of our public agenda that we should not allow for a society that shuts down voices. You know, you're on Twitter, you're on social media. You know how many years I have been cyber-stalked and bullied by operators of government or of politics in this country. Their minions are paid to constantly just insult. Insult doesn't do anything to me. Yesterday, actually, I felt nothing at what he was doing. I was more interested in ensuring that Natasha, Senator Uduaha, will never not get the justice that she's asking for. And for us, it's simply give her the opportunity of fair hearing. It is the least that a Senate that cares about public integrity of public institutions should do. Why are the senators running away from the core and central issue? Why? Why are they doing all other things but not responding to this cry by a woman who said, this injustice shall not be sustained? And we all, reasonable people of this country, agree with her that until the Senate does that, all of these kinds of drama that was presented yesterday would not persuade anybody. Nothing that Dr. Abiola, the petitioner, nor myself did in trying to establish that we had voice and that we needed to be heard was in any way inappropriate.
Ayo.
Well, just a quick one, Mr. Ezekwesili. It means then, are you saying, because when I heard you say one of the last few statements you made, was that this wasn't just the voice of women that were being silenced, it was the voice of those people who are opposing the system, so to speak. So are you saying that this is really not a gender thing, but a system thing? Can you hear me, madam?
Now I can hear you.
Okay.
I wasn't hearing.
Oh, it's okay. So when you said the other time that the matter at hand is not an issue of gender, it's more of silencing the voice of people who have a voice. So are you insinuating or making it categorical that the issue at hand is not a gender problem, but an issue, a system problem. Well, I guess we'll have Madam Ezekwesili back in a moment. Let me throw that question to you, Dr. Akiyode, in Abuja studio. So what's your take on that?
Well, I believe it's a system problem where you think that there is a voice that is strong and you need to shut down that voice so that it can allow you to have a say. You can shut down. It's also a gender problem in the sense that one of the things that this had brought out for me is that, you know, in our gender work, we tell people it doesn't really, violence against women does not really matter which position you are in, whether you are the president of the country or you are, Dr. Obi has all the curriculum vitae that could, you know, make you to see a woman at any point in time and have the 100% respect for her. So for him to do that to her shows that he has no respect whatsoever, you know, for women. And he kept talking about womanhood and he kept talking about all that. So in a part, it's a gender issue. And what we saw also happening to Natasha is, how dare you, a woman, you know, want to speak in the National Assembly, you know, against the power that be. And when you see all the other things happening to her, the recall, you know, and a whole lot of other things, you can see that it's quite political. And then see the system at play, where the system itself tries to suppress, you know, voices, you know, of its own people. So I would say it's both systemic, and at the same time, we can also see the shade of the gender bias, you know, in what we're seeing with what is happening there.
One of the questions.
One clear thing that
My apologies. One of the questions that has been raised, because I know that we don't really have much time with you on this segment, is one of the questions that's been raised by a number of people is, there are like 3 other women in the Senate, and it would seem like none of them has spoken about the matter. Do you think it's because their voices were silenced, or as some people say, maybe there was an error in the process and lack of respect for the rules of the Senate, so to speak?
Well, I don't think it's the right thing for us to always put women on the radar. You know, when something is happening to a particular woman, then you will say, why should the women not speak? You know, there are some men within the National Assembly that are speaking, and I think at a point in time, Senator Kingibe also spoke. And this had happened to her before, so there is a pattern. There is a pattern. The First Lady today was also harassed in that manner while she was in the Senate. So it's a pattern which we need to condemn, which we need to stop. So it is not about women against women. And I think that when we put that argument in that way, it takes away that discussion about what is the role of the system and how is patriarchy dealing with the society. Now, patriarchy is endemic in this country. And it is within the National Assembly, it's within the psyche of women, it's also within the psyche of men. So you see a situation where you get to this kind of situation and you see some women, because they know they have spoken before, because they know they had attempted to speak before and they have been shut down and they didn't get the kind of support that they can get, especially in a place where they are just about 4 out of 109. We rather want to keep quiet. Okay. And of course, you know the thing about the power dynamic on some of this conversation. Okay. If you speak, you may not get what you are expected to get for your constituency. So there are a lot of things there. So there are issues of corruption, accountability, you know, system failure, and a whole lot of things that
Dr. Akiyode,
you know, we saw playing out.
My apologies. It's the reason I asked the question the other time whether it was a gender problem or a system problem. Now, let me ask Dr. Ezekwesili this one question, because one of the conversations we've had in the course of this week, madam, is that of whether or not democracy is still on its feet. And that was the part of the major conversation at an event that my colleague with you there, with Mark, where, you know, attended earlier in the week in Abuja, where some people who sat were asking the question whether or not democracy was alive or was in danger or in jeopardy in Nigeria. This occurrence that happened, madam, does it say anything to you about our 20-something-year-old democracy, or it's just a standalone event?
It's a very interesting question that you've asked, and reflecting on it and being data-driven by it, I want you to know that the Economist, a magazine, normally measures and ranks democracies around the world. We, as a country, are in the group of countries that are not regarded as democracy. We have a score of less than 4 out of a possible 1, out of 4 out of a possible 10. So that already situates us in terms of our democratic credentials. And yet, within that evidence, we see many things that suggest that the many decades of militarization of Nigeria left a very serious dent on our capacity as citizens to fully understand democracy. The example that we are discussing today being the things that have played out in our National Assembly at different times in its existence. I think this is probably the 10th Assembly or so. We have seen an attitude of those who are supposed to understand the ethos and principles and nuances and the culture of democracy, not in any way exemplified. So, for example, when I, as a citizen, step out there, which I do frequently, to make a statement on an issue of national significance, what do you think happens? The politicians immediately release their cannons through those who are their trolls on social media to insult and to want to shut down. I hope you know that there have been many women as leaders around the world who simply could not stand up to the cyber bullying. And so they either decided to leave office or they decided to leave the media space, therefore deepening and accentuating these historical and systemic barriers to women participating usefully in democracies. So what is the key thing? I think the key thing is for Nigerians to understand that the episode of Senator Natasha is not about Senator Natasha. People miss it. Even in the case of women who have spoken or misspoken concerning her matter, the issue is that there is a system that is a system of democracy, and there are rules of democracy. There is a constitution that must be respected as a ground norm of our society. Now, all of these pillars of democracy, when any group of people or a single person can override them and the rest of society just takes position on the basis of whether they like a person or don't like a person, they are setting themselves up for a future destruction. Because it doesn't select. When you enable a system of injustice, you enable a system of opacity and not transparency. When you enable a system of unaccountable use of power, when you enable and are enamored by a system that agrees with abuse of public power, then you cannot say that you are growing your democratic credentials. The world is watching us. And ultimately, the call that I have is for young women to not even, they should see the fact of my stance, Dr. Akiyode's stance, Akiyode-Afolabi's stance yesterday, the stance of the real heroine of this matter, Senator Uduaghan, to be the ways that societies and women have made societies that refuse to recognize the participation of women to eventually be on the national agenda. And so it is progress for us. They saw yesterday the kind of things that happen that must not continue to happen. That is the beginning of the journey toward progress.
All right, Dr. Ezekwesili, let me quickly ask Dr. Akiyode now as we wrap up. The matter has now been adjourned synodine in the Senate. What is your next line of action?
Well, two things happened. They adjourned it, synodine, but they closed the matter. Because by the end of the discussion, they came up with another agenda, that the matter is already in court, and that their committee do not have the power to investigate the matter, and so they brought out the rule of the National Assembly to justify that opinion. Although that also brought out another issue about, so why did you invite the petitioner in the first instance if you were really actually working with your rule? Yeah, we would continue holding our head high.
As you should.
Yes, and we believe that we cannot be silenced. So we would continue to advocate for justice and fairness in the matter of Senator Natacha.
You haven't said where precisely. Where is that advocacy going to continue?
Well, there are cases in court. So we would continue to stand with her in the court case, and we'll continue to mobilize Nigerians to speak in favor of justice for Senator Natacha.
Well, I have to thank you both. Dr. Obi Ezekwesili is a former Minister of Education, a former Vice President at the World Bank for Africa, and also the founder of School of Fixed Politics. Dr. Ezekwesili, you are certainly not a disgrace to womanhood. Thank you so much for coming on the program this morning.
Thank you very much, Malcolm.
And Dr. Abiola Akiyode, thank you so much for coming on the program this morning. She is the founder and convener of Womanifesto and also the executive director of Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center. Thank you so much for coming on the program as well.